This is not me, but my father, who was commercial sailor from the 50s to the 70s. He was on tanker crossing the Pacific Ocean. They were far from land and kind of in the middle of the ocean. The Pacific Ocean is big, very big, so the chance of meeting other vessels out there is very slim. Still, one night when it was completely dark, dots started to appear on the radar. This was in the 60s, so radar technology wasn't close to what it is today. So my father went out to the bridge wing to see if he could see any lanterns. Nothing. When he came back to the bridge, he saw that the radar were now completely covered with dots all around the ship. Big dots too, but still not a single lantern in sight. My father thought it must be a malfunction or some weather causing it. Still, the water was flat and weather seemed calm, so he made a call on the radio for any ships in the area. Immediately, he got an answer from an American voice. It turned out he had managed to cross paths with an American carrier group on maneuver in the middle of the Pacific. He then requested if they could turn their lights on so he could maneuver safely out of their fleet. Suddenly, within a few seconds, as he described it, it was like a whole city materialized out of the darkness around them. From horizon to horizon, there were huge carriers, supply ships, escort ships, and whatnot. The contrast of being alone in the vast ocean for days to this was very strange. He managed to maneuver the tanker through the myriad of ships, and when he came to the outskirts of the fleet, suddenly as soon as they appeared, the whole fleet went completely dark again. Gone. Once again, the ship was totally alone in the vast, dark ocean. He described the encounter as the strangest feeling he experienced during 30 years at sea. Not a sailor, and I wasn't on the ocean, but on a cliff overlooking the water. It was California, and I was traveling with my family for a road trip, so we decided to stop and see the views. The parking area was blocked off from the view by trees, and we had to take a trail to see the views. Me and my brother, aged 19 and 15, decided that we would run all of the way there, but my brother is faster than me, so I lost sight of him on this extremely steep downward slope. I came to a fork in the trail, but I didn't know which was he went, and I didn't receive an answer when I called his name. I went right and followed the trail all the way down to a cliff, at least 50 meters above the water, still calling his name, and still he didn't respond. Looking down, there were jagged rocks in the water below, so falling was a guaranteed death sentence. The wind picked up and I had to actually press myself against the rocks to stop it from pushing me over the edge. It continued to get faster and faster, but then suddenly stopped. I don't know how, but the air went completely still, and I heard a faint voice of a little girl, maybe around 5 or 6, crying and screaming like she was terrified of something. There was nobody else around me, and there was no other voice that I heard, so I started calling for the little girl. She very clearly started calling out, "Mama, Mama, I'm scared." And I followed her voice to this slightly jutting shelf that started to lead down the cliff. The rocks were covered in sand and were slightly damp, so I knew it was dangerous, but I continued on anyways. Maybe only 6 meters down there was a sharp 90-degree turn against the cliff that I couldn't see around, but my instincts were telling me to get back. I slowed, but still inched my way to this turn, and looking over was a perfectly vertical drop into the ocean below. If I took even one more normal-sized step, my foot would have stepped right over. I still looked around to see if there really was a little girl somewhere, but there was nowhere she could have hidden, so I went back up. I could still hear her voice, and it sounded so close to me, but I couldn't see her. My brother eventually caught up with me since he went down the left trail, and the voice stopped. Upon asking him if he saw anyone or heard the voice, he just shook his head. Creepiest experience I ever had with the ocean. As the warmer months roll in and the cold bitterness wanes on Cape Ann, the beaches are usually loaded with visitors near and far. But this is an unusual year, and the only ones here call it home. There's typically a steady buzz of traffic and motorcycle engines, laughing families and blaring music, escaping from slow-moving vehicles. Once you shed those layers of noise, you're left with a quiet ferociousness. The seagulls in the blue mornings, the tide breaking and receding, the foghorn and the wind that crashes against tin storm doors are reminders that this is the edge of Earth, and beyond, the blue horizon is as unforgiving as an angry God. It was 2:15 a.m. when I woke. The wind was hitting my bedroom window straight on, causing a draft, great enough to rustle me awake after being asleep for only 3 hours. The air isn't typically so frigid around this time of year, so I grabbed my winter comforter I packed away in the closet last month. While I was up, I went for a glass of water. I think it's the salty air that makes me so thirsty at night. I filled the glass twice from the kitchen sink, lifting the glass further as I gulped the water. Through the bottom of it, I saw what looked like a face staring back at me. I quickly pulled the glass from my face to immediately feel silly for my irrationality. It was often the wind that would wake me, but it was psyches like this that kept me awake. I decided to go into the living room to read until I felt tired enough, or until the coffee maker started brewing, whichever came first. The wind outside set the backdrop for The Sailor's Tale I've had on my bookshelf for quite some time. It's a canvas-bound first edition with artwork of sails and rope on the front. It was an exciting read, one good for the earliest morning hours. A crew of fishermen were to sail off the northeast coast earlier than anticipated to provide enough food for their village during an unusually dry season. A seemingly simple effort with little chance for dangerous waters. The ocean, however, is an unpredictable one, and soon on their journey they realized the error they made in their assumption. As I read on, the words seemed to have come alive. And then the sea shanty, the work'll be flowing like waves I be rowing. My kids'll be feeding, my wife will be smitten. I only pray that if I'm taken away, my good deeds don't wash away too. The words wistfully blew in with the draft. I stopped reading and listened for a moment. When I stood and walked closer to the front window, I saw a man standing on my porch. He looked past the marina wearing a heavy, dark raincoat, hands in his pockets with contemplation. It was a still moment for him and for me until his weathered face turned my way. The draft hit me with a raw sea breeze as I backed up from the window with a chill in my spine. The further I backed up, the fainter the man's figure became, until he had disappeared once again. I was tempted to step forward again, but it was difficult to bring myself to do. Soon the coffee would brew, and I'd move on to a new day. It was easier to attribute the mirage to a lack of sleep and be done with it. It rained all day, and the wind would seldom rest. There would be periods of calm followed by intimidating gusts, which again set the tone for the sailor's tale I'd been enveloped in. The vessel was coming upon a giant swell that would threaten to capsize them, but there was no way around it. They were already caught in the midst of the chaotic flow. The surmounting sea would ultimately get the best of them, but they continued to fight into the darkness of the bottom of the ocean. First, it was only their bodies that were gone. Their spirit didn't leave the community they left behind. Though as time passed on, that community grew old, and their spirit was removed with each generation, to the point where the individuals were a faint glimmer, even if the stories of them still thrived. The fascinating thing is, up until this point in the book, I didn't realize that I was never told their names. They were the captain, the mate, the deckhand, and so on. Despite this, they became increasingly apparent the further on I read. The deckhand was practically a kid, in stature at least. He had reddish hair, didn't tan well. The mate was a tall, wiry fellow who was sometimes too funny for his own good. The captain was a force callous to the dangers of his position. It took a lifetime for the ocean to win. The more I read, the more I recognized him. Upon the final words of the story, I looked out of my window, and there he stood on my porch, looking past the marina. As I stepped closer, other familiar faces stood in the background, each looking beyond. Opening the door, I saw that it wasn't just the water they saw, but rather the family that greeted them in a timeless world. And with each day, each word and each page, you and I draw nearer with our age.
Now remember, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Then subscribe for more horrifying true stories.